Welcome to episode 104. I'm your co-host Isaiah Bollinger with the Hard Truth About B2B e-commerce, and I'm back with Tim.
Hello, Isaiah. Hello, listeners. It's great to have you here. I had an aunt who just passed away at age 108. So I remember celebrating her 104th, but I'm trying to think of other things that get up to numbers that big. So I'm excited. I'm really, really thrilled that we're this far along. We did hear, before the podcast started that Rick has actually done more episodes than us, but we're trying
It's now a competition. Who's gonna
not a
beat
competition.
Not a competition. So just a quick shout out, and then I'm going to pause for our sponsors. I have a couple people I want to mention. One is a guy named Kyle Costco. He is a marketer who's been listening to our podcast and getting a lot out of it, and his teams have listened to our podcast as well, and I think that's remarkable. So thank you so much for that. And I'm also going to give a shout out to my husband because I never mentioned him, and he actually listens to our podcast, and he has nothing to do with B2B e-commerce. So Richard Gehrig, thank you for listening to this podcast. I really appreciate it. So yay.
Maybe he's gonna start a distributor or manufacturer pretty soon. I don't know. You never know.
He's learned a lot. He's a professor of cognitive science who studies narrative, right? So he has a whole other world going on, but he does listen. So thank you for that.
Do you have any advice for us as maybe as a completely outsider? You never know. It could be useful to hear.
He's all about storytelling, and he's actually keynoted at big marketing conferences and stuff. So, it's all about narrative. If we tell a good story, then we're going to bring people in and, get more there. So
I'll keep working on my narrative skills.
So I'll just pause for one moment to let our team put the sponsor mentions in, and then I'll throw it back to Isaiah and we can kick it all off. So one moment. Balance is a B2B e-commerce payment solution that works well for you and for your buyers. It offers a seamless one-click checkout for almost any payment method, including ACH, wire, checks, cards, even terms. It's used by leaders in B2B e-commerce, and it's as easy as buying a shirt from Amazon. Check them out at getbalance.com. Book a session and tell them what your needs are. They are the first dedicated payment platform for B2B e-commerce, 100% tailored to your needs. Thanks again to our sponsor, Balance. Isaiah, who do we have as our wonderful guest today?
Yeah, I'm super excited to introduce Rick Watson, who I guess, Rick, do you consider yourself kind of founder, owner, operator of Rick Watson Consulting, or how do you describe yourself as like your own business? Because you kind of, in a way, you are the business, right?
Yeah. About 4.5 years ago, I founded RMW Commerce Consulting, and I work with mid-market private equity brands that are looking to digitally transform and grow their e-commerce channels, whether there's direct-to-consumer, B2B, or third-party marketplaces. I also work with a number of software and service providers exclusively in the e-commerce industry to improve their thought leadership and as well as their go-to-market strategy. So how can we penetrate the market better? Usually it's a combination of like awareness. We have a good product, but nobody knows who we are, or kind of the opposite problem. We know who we are today, but we have this problem where we're trying to get someplace new in the future, and we would love someone to help us plan how to get there. So those tend to be the types of engagements, and it's been a lot of fun over the last 4 years. I'd never done any consulting before starting this business. I grew up in technology, so I'm kind of like the anti-consultant. I'm very cynical about consultants, for whatever reason, which actually I think helps with credibility, because I can talk to a client and I can understand like why they might be skeptical of calling someone in from the outside. So it's been a lot of fun, and one of the things I enjoy about consulting, particularly with regards to the e-commerce industry, is there's so much technology out there. There's like an app for everything. There's a platform for everything. There's so many things that you can buy, sell, install, configure, whatever. That's not the problem that most people have.
No.
Like,
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
you guys know what the problem is.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, a lot of times I say, like, when people try and pitch me on a new app or a new thing, I'm like, I don't know if there's room for another payment gateway or another like rewards app. And I'm like, I think it's just that, yeah, it's not the problem, right? There's a lot
Yeah.
of good rewards apps, reviews apps, payments. Most of
Yeah.
the core problems have been solved. I think it's strategically putting it all together in a way that helps the business move forward
Yeah.
culturally, process what. That's the hard part. That's where,
Yeah.
Culture
yeah,
is such a
So
big deal. You know?
people, process, strategy. I spend a lot of my time in my practice thinking about those things. Culture, there's only so much I can do to help with that, but I agree. I agree with you, Tim.
No, it's just we just bump
It's
into
a
it.
huge problem. I agree.
We bump into
yeah.
it. Yeah.
I put that in the
Well,
people bucket.
well,
Yeah.
let's just dive right into what you talked about in terms of some of the things that you see the most, which is I think there's an interesting change in culture around private equity getting into B2B commerce or getting into B2B businesses, buying manufacturers, distributors. And then you also have the family oriented businesses who are maybe pre-private equity. I'd love to hear like your opinions on the differences of that culture and how it like impacts B2B e-commerce or how they approach it. Because it's almost like they start family is like commonly what I see, and then it goes to private equity. It's like that's the evolution of. I know that's oversimplification, but it's a lot
Yeah,
of them.
no, it's pretty close, I think, especially since um look, B2B commerce is not sexy.
No.
It's not like the next hot shoe brand that you see on the street somewhere, right? It's like, bulldozer parts. Like that's B2B commerce to me.
Caterpillar was
Or
like the
like
keynote. Yeah.
or like door hardware. Like it could be anything more boring to buy. But you got to do it. And you have distributors and manufacturers that are selling those things all day. And so I think if you think about private equity is generally, you start to think about it. Who are these companies? These are a lot of times holding companies
Sure.
that are sector focused. And within a sector, they often have what they refer to as a platform, which basically platform means is like, who is their big incumbent player in this market? And that they tend to be sort of the bellwether of a space, and they're trying to acquire like source materials and manufacturers to like increase their market share. I mean, their goal is to get a monopoly. Let's be clear, in a sector that no one knows about before everyone else finds out about it. And so they're trying to get long-term cash flow, and they're trying to buy and sell companies, usually over a 3 to 8 year time horizon.
Sure.
I find I like to say, welcome to private equity. Everything is for sale. And so if you're an executive at a private equity backed firm, you kind of know that this is what it is. Like, people are buying. A lot of times these companies are, I'll use a kind word. I won't say junk, but they're like, they need a lot of help and love. And so you have these transformation experts. The best ones my favorite private equity word is special situations.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Which was really my favorite word in the industry. It basically means it's a complete dumpster fire, and it needs a lot of help.
And that's when they call you.
Exactly. It's a reboot across the board. Actually, those are my funnest situations because it's very unclear. If you're on the inside, it's very unclear what to do next. But from the outside, it's actually quite clear what needs to happen.
Really? Yeah. And
Yeah.
why do you find that there's a resistance to that, where it's obvious, but they're resisting what's obvious, or
Look, once, so when do people hire? Like, so my perspective is skewed by my role.
Mhm.
yeah,
As a consultant, my ideal customer has just bought a company within the last 12 months.
Mhm.
yeah,
As a result, it's new money.
Mhm.
They have just installed a new executive who is aligned with the goals of that new money and has a value creation plan to generate money for the owner in the next 3 to 5 years.
yeah,
And so what they have is motivation
Mhm.
and money and
Mhm.
willingness, but they don't have expertise.
Yep.
yeah.
And so that to me is an ideal private equity situation for a consultant like me, because they have urgency and money, but they need expertise, and I can help deliver that. So
And
yeah,
that's where
Tim.
our worlds are so similar in that way. I mean, and our podcast listeners have heard, bits and pieces of the things that I work on. Same sort of thing. I mean, it's not necessarily always private equity, but I end up in those special situation companies very often where literally I'll get a call or a message saying we have a problem. It really is like the start of a movie or something. It's like we have a problem. Right,
Houston,
And
Houston, we have a problem.
it really is. It's very funny, but it ends up being exactly that, where there's a key leader or leaders who've been installed and they have this thing going on and they've got to make sure that they figure it out as quickly as possible. They need experts. They need people to come in. And that's how also folks like Trellis get involved too, to an extent, because it's like, who do I end up calling? It's like, hello, I need somebody who can do these three things, right? Please come on in and we'll get this done. It's remarkable how similar a lot of these things are.
Yeah.
I would assume that culturally, the family-owned businesses are very different than the private equity, because they're not necessarily immediately trying to sell, or they don't have this
Yeah.
3 to 8 year cash flow,
No.
debt based, because a lot of it is debt driven. So they have to have the cash flow to pay off the debt. So it's probably a very different culture. Do you get brought in ever to the family owned businesses, or not really, because they don't see the problem. They don't
They're,
think they have a problem.
for many of them, it's a lifestyle business that has gone ahead of expectations. That's kind of what it looks like.
Mm,
It may or may not be professionalized. They could actually have pretty decent systems.
Sure.
So like you might see them with like a big e-commerce site or a Shopify and a HubSpot CRM. And you might look at the private equity company and they have nothing. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
you're
yeah.
like, which one is more
You know.
sophisticated here? Because it's for a young founder, or usually it's like a
Second
lot of times
generation, yeah.
it's almost always second generation
Yeah.
where
Yeah,
the father or the parents know how to get supply, and the son knows technology,
yeah.
or the daughter, and so that's it sounds like you've seen the same thing as well.
I mean,
I
so we work with a lot of family run business. Like, we have both, right? We work with a lot of family run businesses and then private equity. And it's just so interesting to see the different dynamics between the two, because they are fairly different. And I would say what I do see about private equity is they're a little bit more cutthroat and aggressive, because they have this time horizon. The urgency is definitely higher from my perspective on private equity, which could be a good and bad thing. We like it in the sense that from a Trellis agency perspective, hey, they want to get more work done faster. But sometimes I do also find that it's completely unrealistic, and it's coming top down by finance guys that have no idea what it actually takes to do anything correctly.
Right.
So,
Well, the situation that I've cautioned people about, I've learned from, over the years. Years ago, I took a role. It was actually an actual job, not just a consulting gig, in a family-owned business where the father founder hired me to manage the son. So I was added in as a layer in there to manage the next generation. That was the worst thing I probably could have ever done. And the consulting would have been far, far better for them and for everybody involved. That did not last very long.
That's so funny.
It was remarkably funny,
Well,
actually.
how do you deal with, and I'm curious if you see the same thing where private equity is like, we're going to digitally transform everything in 6 months and we're going to change the ERP, we're going to fix e-commerce, and like, do you ever have to push back on timing or dates, or whatever's maybe not realistic
Yeah,
what they have? Does that come
that's
up often, or?
that's definitely true. I think it's more often that they just don't know. And so I think the risk is actually to someone, it kind of depends on, is there a digitally savvy leader in the house already?
Mhm.
And if there is, then things are better. If things are not, then no offense to agencies, but agencies are pitching them all manner of things. And
Of
some of them
course. Yeah.
have less scruples than others.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so you could say like, oh, I'm gonna redo your website in 3 months, and you get 5 proposals, and who do you believe?
They have no idea. It's so
You know?
funny. 'Cause we literally just had this conversation. That's part of why I was late actually to this podcast, is because we're trying to figure out how to better explain our process, because our conclusion is that most of the agency industry is bullshit or crap, sorry to, and that they're just kind of like throwing out numbers without a lot of science to back them up.
Sure.
And we've put like a lot of effort into refining our estimating process to make it more accurate, but we're trying to figure out like, but how do we prove that or show that? Like, and so we're like, do we show them this like crazy Excel formula that we use, or is that too much? Like, and it's to your point, it's like, we're like, we
Well,
could throw our name in the hat, but like, we might be the best one, but they have no idea, right? Like, how
yeah.
do they decide? And that's where I think people like you come in, right? Because you're someone that can help kind of navigate that. And is that a lot what it is helping them navigate
Yeah.
the vendors?
Well,
Because yeah.
look, it definitely, that definitely becomes part of it. Usually it starts a lot with people process.
Yeah.
Understanding their catalog, understanding their customer base, understanding the contracts, understanding the
Yeah.
systems that are in place before. Like, do they have an ERP or not have an ERP? Do they have a product information management system, or do they not?
Yeah.
Is there CRM? Do they have a CRM system? Are they using the CRM system?
Mhm.
Usually the answer is no. Um,
They have it, right? They have it, but they
yeah,
don't use it.
it's barely used. What is used is that ERP. I tell you that.
I will
That's
agree with that. That's the one thing that, like, if there's one thing I've learned in B2B commerce over 12 years, is that like, you have to know the ERP well to work with them. Or they, like, if you can't work with that part of their business, then you can't help them, basically.
yeah. And so essentially, what the the most common question or problem, Tim said people come to you and say they have a problem. When people come to me saying we have a problem, how they describe in their own words is like, we need to become easier to do business with.
Yeah.
Mm,
That is a core problem they have. And so they're not necessarily expecting e-commerce funnel that looks like direct to consumer. They're expecting to digitally enable their sales teams so that their reps are more effective and their customers have a better experience, rather than having to pick up the phone or fax or email for a specific, like an Adobe form for everything.
yeah.
Or they want to reduce the cost to serve the quote unquote house accounts. So
Yeah.
like accounts, the long tail of accounts that they
Yeah.
don't want people to handle, that maybe their support team is handling. They
Mhm.
want to like bring those costs down an order of magnitude.
So I see that as like the common easy value prop, that they're like, oh, let's get the long tail orders online. Do you see resistance? Because we see this with like, they're like, oh, we'll never bring the larger orders online, or we'll never, the larger deals will never go online. That always goes through a sales rep. Do you get, because I think there's still a resistance to sales enabling that online.
Yeah.
You know,
I always think about scenarios and use cases. And so I think there's 3 or 4 scenarios that are obvious wins for everyone.
Mhm.
One is like, is your catalog accurately represented online?
yeah,
Even, not only text, PDFs, catalogs, manuals, installation instructions, use information, fitment information,
yeah,
which is B2B is like the hardest part of B2B by far, I think, is fitment, period. In a customer.
You could really make a case for that. I agree.
It's so hard.
Mhm.
So I think accurate catalog information is one overwhelming use case that everyone cares about, even if they have a big sales team. Second is inventory availability.
Mhm.
Like, just literally, do we have this or not? Third is delivery status, delivery and order status.
Mhm.
That's an obvious thing that nobody's going to argue with. You're not trying to replace the rep. You're not
Mhm.
trying to threaten the rep. You're just trying to, like, why does the rep want to answer every single question about when am I going to get this thing?
Yeah.
Or from with customers. And then finally is, I think reorders. I think reorders are really great scenarios to start with because, while the rep might want to get some of those, like every year or every quarter,
yeah.
they might want to check in to make sure that, hey, you're not reordering the last year's model. You want them reordering, the new model. But by and large, there is probably kind of some of those that if you need to change your next reorder, you want to make it easier. Again, it's about becoming easier to do business with in
Yeah.
a way that does not negate the value,
But
expertise, experience.
how do they
Okay.
decide that they're not easy to do business with? Is it because their customers have told them that, or
It's
they're losing market share?
it's
Yeah,
not a decision, it's a
Yeah.
fact.
okay,
Mhm.
They're losing market share and
Yeah.
they know it.
okay.
Yep.
So they've the market has come to them to say, we're going with your competitors. Like you are, yeah, okay,
I love it when big customers will raise their hand, with some of the relationships I've been in, and they'll raise their hand and say, I could go other places, and I do, and it's fascinating being in the room, like watching the reactions when millions of dollars had been flowing from client X, and then they're saying, make it easier because it's easier elsewhere, right? And that's so compelling. It's incredible.
Yeah, and I think when we were at Envision B2B, Isaiah, um, some people, and I think Lori and others were saying at the event, like, recording customers saying those things, like you said, Tim, those are powerful things. Like, if you're in the stage where you need to create change, not just manage change,
Mhm.
yeah.
I think those things can be impactful.
It's like they almost don't believe it until they see the video of their big customers saying that. I want to touch on, I think that one of the most undervalued aspects of B2B commerce is basically the most simple thing that you just mentioned, which is, well, simple and complex, because you said fitment is complex, but I think in concept product data is relatively simple, right, compared to ERP integration and some of these other
Sure.
things. And I think that most B2B commerce companies or B2B companies, manufacturers, distributors, especially distributors, for the most part, are pretty far behind where they should be with product data. And going back to that ERP, it's like they have price and SKU and like weird inventory based on like warehouse and things that you can't even understand when you look at it in like an Excel sheet, but like they know what it means. And so they're trying to bring this online. I think there's massive value to bring to like modernizing that, making it, Amazon like, and then using it for marketing and Google Ads and like, I think that there's this huge opportunity of just like Google shopping and advertising in these industries. I think I can't remember if we were recording or not. I think this is off record, but we were talking about how there's so much opportunity for B2B to market themselves when it's not as saturated like B2C. Like they they could become number one on Google, shopping very quickly and, selling whatever, what was it? Chairlifts or,
Yeah,
what was, yeah,
forklifts, yeah,
forklifts. Yeah.
lift
Forklifts.
parts.
You could become the number one forklift parts, Google advertisement probably pretty quickly by having a good catalog, and some of it is, I feel like they don't even want to do a list price, so then they can't do Google shopping. Like, do you run into, like, what do you say when you see this opportunity, which I think is a massive opportunity, but they just won't do it, or they don't take advantage of it?
Yeah, look, I try to go where the combination of pain and ease, and it to me it's all about sequencing. And if they don't want to go someplace first, then you can't force them to.
Yeah.
But you can sequence it. And so people are always looking for the lowest hanging fruit, and you're looking and probing for the lowest hanging fruit that is going to have the most impact to the board. And so if they view this as like, look, this is our core business is under threat, then that's really where you want to stick. You really want to spend your time there, because that's going to be impactful to your client. They kind of view that as the quick wins. The emerging digital stuff is like, this could work out, might work out, this might not work out. This is a future opportunity, so it might be year 2, year 3.
Yeah.
And so as a consultant, I would say in particular, I'm usually in the upfront part where it's a lot messier. And you're fighting through the resistance. You're trying to figure out, like, are the teams even organized and incented the right way to make, and do they know what systems they need to put in place so that in 2 years they can actually take advantage of Google Shopping, because the data will be right and the pricing will be right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But now it's like too early.
Yeah, it's hard to think 2 years ahead and how these changes are going to impact, that nuance there.
Yeah, sometimes it's just cleaning up. It's cleaning up. I mean, I'm going to just put a period on that. I mean, that's been entire relationships that I've had where it's like, you know what? I thought you guys thought we were going to work on X, but here are the 24 things that have to happen first, right? And it's like, we got to get rid of these bad relationships. Why don't you have people working on X internally? It's like, it becomes this thing that goes on and on and on. And there's progress. You could chart that progress that it's being made, but it's not what they expected.
Yeah.
So
look, I've seen $30 million customers with 1,000 customers in their database and 1,500 individual price books.
Yeah.
And so it's like,
doesn't surprise me. They probably made 2 and then they forgot, and they have like 3 for the same customer, and then
Oh my God.
and so it's very hard to digitize that and at least make it maintainable.
Real quick, and then I want to pivot to another question. Tim, I know this is one of your favorite topics. How do you feel about companies moving to more of a tiered pricing, algorithmic, or maybe sort of a simpler pricing model that's can be digitized versus custom price books? Like, is that something that you advise on, or it just depends on the company? This is for you, Rick.
Could you repeat that? I think I missed it.
So Tim and I have kind of discussed this. We feel like there's a lot of opportunity for companies to simplify their pricing, maybe move to some sort of tiered pricing or structured pricing that's much easier to digitize versus custom price books. And I know that's a very hard change for a lot of these companies.
Yes.
So I'm curious what you advise them on, or do you just try and avoid that battle, or that's not the battle?
It's not the first battle, is the short answer. I think, look, if you're talking about the house accounts, it's a winnable battle, because you're talking about new relationships or low volume relationships, and you're trying to reduce the cost to serve those customers and to make them more profitable and to make them consistent, so that in the future you can manage them more easily. I think the last thing you want to do is get into a battle with the reps about who understands how to cut, how to price something for a customer. And so I'm not sure that is a winnable battle for a lot of companies, unless there's like a very enlightened sales leader.
It's tough. It's tough. I mean, I'm not gonna. I mean, I like making the case for it because I think there's an ideal out there that we might be able to get to, and I have seen it work. You know, there was a company I was associated with for a while, manufacturing a lot of electrical and lighting and other products, and they did move to a volume-based tiered model for their thousands of customers. I mean, they have many, many, many customers. They're one of the top manufacturers in their space. And it took a while and the reps were dubious, but it ended up working. And so having seen that, I think,
Yeah.
okay, you know, it
It
can
can work.
work. It can
I,
work, right? It took a while.
I will tell you, one of the most impressive companies, small company, is family owned, but highly, highly modern for a family owned company. You know, mid-size, right? Not tiny, but not like, you know, Fortune 500. They, back in like 2018, when we were kind of doing some early work with them, they were already pretty sophisticated, having kind of like this custom portal. You know, this was a modern platform. It was they had customized the platform so that you would get additional price breaks, but you could see where your status was in terms of order volume. So you, like, once you hit it's like you started as like bronze, and then you'd go to silver, and then you go to gold, and it was, they kind of gamified
I want platinum
the
status. I want
yeah.
platinum.
I mean, I think that if you can figure that out, and there's way easier ways to do that now than there was, you know, 6 years ago, whenever they were doing
yeah.
it. It was pretty impressive, and they had been very successful with B2B commerce back then. This is
Yeah.
probably even more now.
I think, you know, we tend to paint sales as the bad person in these companies, but a lot of times they're just, they understand how complex the business is
Yeah.
in a way that no one else does, and they understand their buyers better than anyone else. And so I think you need to find change agents within the sales team, because not every sales rep has the same point of view.
Yeah.
Number one, and I think if you're going to introduce like an algorithmic pricing, introducing it as a sales tool first, and not necessarily make it buyer facing from day one, can help. Because the first thing they're going to do is like the first thing a rep is going to do, who's been in the business for longer than 10 years, are going to tell you all the ways that your tool is terrible. Like, it's not
That's
going to
true.
work. It's not going to work
Yeah.
in these situations.
Yep.
In this, and
Well,
like,
I
none
think
of my
that
customers are going to use this. And so
couldn't you have overrides or promo codes, or I think
yeah,
that's where you just need to have some sort of flexibility in the model. And to your point, I think you probably don't want to roll it out to every customer, especially the largest customers off the bat, but I think it can be effective for smaller customers.
yeah,
I want to change gears to what I think is, both you guys have a lot of experience working over the course of, you know, many years on dealing with these change management issues. Like, I'm curious, what are some of the accounts that stood out from you? I'd like to hear kind of on the extreme good side and the extreme bad side, because sometimes these outliers can be valuable. Like, someone that you were like, man, these guys, I didn't think it was going to work, but they, you know, reorganized their team, and all of a sudden they're like killing it with B2B e-commerce, and it's like one of your best case studies. And on the flip side, like something that just was so dysfunctional, it's like, here's what not to ever do again.
I'll let you start this one, Tim.
You know, there are a couple examples I have brought up over the years. Well, it has been years. How long have we done our podcast? Over the years here.
It's 3 years. I know.
3 years. Oh my
It's
God.
gonna be 4 years soon, which is like, I know.
But you know, I mean, I'll mention them by name because they're pals of mine. But you know, like Becker School Supply, they're sort of a behind the scenes, very interesting business. You know, and they are exactly what you would expect. You know, it's like all of the stuff that, you know, elementary school and middle schools and high schools, you know, buy big time, and often colleges and workplaces also. And a fascinating business. And they did almost everything right. They had a very big, like, fat catalog, decades ago, and they had that working really well.
You
And
mean the Uline catalog?
that kind of catalog, basically like the Uline catalog, and they took those teams and they kind of morphed them over time and retrained them, and they made them very digital, and they became these great e-commerce people, and they do B2B and B2C, and they took their salespeople and they retrained them. I mean, honestly, they've done great work, and they're really doing well, and they were a family-owned business. I don't know if they still are, but they were. They've done very, very well over the years. So they basically sat down as a team. And the advice I always give to people is, what did they do right? Right? They sat down on a very regular basis and said, how do we deal with these new things that are happening out in the world right now? How do we respond to them, or do we respond to them? And they were very open in those conversations, and they'd say, okay, we're not really a catalog business. We're a school supply business. So let's not be so, romantic about the catalog. We're going to figure out what to do next. Right. And so it's helped them stay, with the competition or ahead of the competition at all times, because they always are talking.
I think you said something really important, which is, how do we stay up with the times, have those meetings? Maybe I don't understand it, because you could easily get sucked into every new fad, crypto, and like, oh, we're going to offer Bitcoin on our website, and then waste a bunch of time trying to add a Bitcoin payment method, which is not going to really help you. Right. And so, and I've fallen victim of that a little bit, to be honest. And so I've learned over the years, like, what are things that are going to really matter in 3-5 years, and what's just like a flash in the pan trend. You got to differentiate.
Yeah,
they're a great example. So, there are always bad ones. I could give you many, and I won't name them because it's a lot.
Anything that stands out that you're just like, here's what not to do. You don't have to name the company. But,
I'll give you just very quickly, because then we should throw this to Rick. But really quickly, I mean, a lot of the things that go wrong are basically exact opposite of what folks like Becker do. They don't want to talk about it. They sentimentalize a process or something that they're doing because it worked for grandpa, right? I mean, it's something that, oh my God, it's been working for us for so many years. We don't want to change it yet. And then
they romanticize, kind of the business almost.
And then they're falling further behind. And I even had the conversation once with a client a while back about video and how they would never do video. Right? Never, never be something that they would do. And I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, why would you never do video?
But I hear that about SMS. We will never do SMS ever. And then
it's that kind of resistance. I think is the thing that I'd say. There are a million things, but that resistance, I think, is the number one.
Or I think that kind of that all-in statement, we will never do this, or that, it's like, those are kind of a little dramatic and probably not realistic sometimes. Yeah.
It's not realistic. And I'm sure you have many.
Yeah, look, I think one of the questions that I ask before I sign a contract is like, look, let's pretend I'm there for 2 months and I tell you all these problems that you're going to have and you're going to solve. Like, who wants to hear it? And I asked that before we start the relationship, just to give them some idea that, like, this isn't all going to be roses and I'm going to come in and tell you that everything is working great and you don't need to change anything. Why we're here is that, like, we want some kind of honest relationship and can talk about, like, what's happening. And if we're going to talk about it, you're not just going to produce a report and walk away, because what has anyone gained from that? And so sometimes that means it's not the right time to start a transformation, because the company isn't really ready to do anything with the data you're going to give them.
Yeah, you're going to tell them, here's all your problems, and they're just going to sit on them for 2 years, and it's a waste of money. Yeah,
exactly. So I think the key from a service provider point of view is, I think there is an art to not starting too early.
I agree.
Before you have that champion,
saying no, honestly, I think
saying no, being willing to nurture that relationship, check in with them every 6 months, like whatever it is. But
I think I just want to butt in, because I think that's a major issue in our industry. And I want to point that out, because I think both software vendors and agencies way oversell. Like, let's be honest, all the vendors are trying to sell the new platform all the time. And then the agencies are trying to sell their widget or whatever theirs. And a lot of these companies, that's maybe not what they need,
Yeah. Look, I'm, as a consultant, I'm very, like, I'm a very first things first kind of person. Let's fix the basics. You know, you can have this great platform if no one knows how to use it. How is it helping you? If your processes are broken, your customers are going to have a bad experience once they hit a person. Let's fix the processes first, and then let's make the technology to make sure it all runs efficiently. Like technology should be about efficiency on that point of view. So I think that's really critical for people to understand, because otherwise you're going to be sold a lot of things that you don't need right now.
Yeah.
So as a consultant, like a lot of service providers talk to me like, hey, I would love you to be able to recommend my service. So like, to be honest, like at the phase someone calls a consultant, the problem is usually unstructured, which usually means it's at the beginning.
Yeah.
We're not optimizing and tuning.
Yeah,
That's
we're
more,
probably further along.
that's
Yeah.
more in the agency world. And so like,
Yeah.
I'm just going to use an example. A company that is looking at to take a brand or manufacturer cross border, that's probably not the first thing I would fix in year one. You know what I mean? For the brand who 99% of their revenue is in the US.
No, that's, I mean, definitely not.
Not yet.
I mean, I could see the replatforming. Eventually, the agency might have to do that work, and that's where it could be relevant, right? But that's
Right.
after you've selected and helped them figure out what platform to
Well,
get.
you know, I mean, one thing, and I can't remember who told me this. I really wish I could give them credit, but it's like anything can be relevant, but not everything is, right? I mean, so when people bring up like, what if? It's like, you know, I'm in a meeting and it's like, what if we did this? And I don't want to shoot it down, but I'm saying, well, but why now? You know, and why are we talking about that in this room today in 2023? Maybe that's a 2024 or 2025 question, right? It's a very weird thing to balance, because people get excited and they get an idea that it's going to really help them out.
What is a common thing that people try and do too early? Like, do you see that often where they're like, we got to do this, and you're like, hey, that's too early?
You know, and I think in different markets, a lot of times, oh, I need a mobile app.
Yeah, mobile app is my favorite one. It's like, no, you don't, especially in B2B.
If it's for us, I'll give you one example when it does work, though. I'll just because I'm like this.
Yeah.
A B2B app works well for a sales team, right? Where they're like, you know, taking images, recording notes, getting documents, sending them back and forth, loading them into their portals or whatever. It's a different way of kind of approaching things while they're on the road. That I've seen that work, you know, that but it's not necessarily like
But
every buyer
I
in
mean,
B2B needs you know, an app. No.
I think that's a perfect example of like the app is phase 5, right? It's like,
It's a phase. Yes.
if your product data is crap, which it probably is,
There you
that's,
go.
you got to fix your product data, right? Like,
100%.
right? Like that should
Yeah.
be, and I think that's also where companies struggle is they're like, well, what do you mean I got to pay Trellis and Rick Watson 50 grand to fix my product data? Like, because there's a lot of work to get like
Work
all
for
like,
that little. He wouldn't
yeah.
work
Well,
for
I'm making that number up, right? Like it could be 10 grand, it could be 20 grand, it could be 100 grand.
I couldn't pass
But
that up.
what I'm saying is,
Thanks, Tim.
like I think there's a lot more work that goes into some of these things where they're like, well, it's just product data. Like, why would I pay for that, right? And I think that's also part of the problem is they just assume it's like that's low level work. That's that's junior work, right? That's
Yeah.
not, you know, expensive agency work, but sometimes it needs to be because it could be complicated, you know.
Yeah. In particular, you get into these product spec sheets and you're talking about bundles and fitment and things like that they're not represented anywhere. There's just no digital representation of this information on the planet, you know, other than this picture, right?
It's true.
I want to ask a slightly different question, and then we can always circle back to this if we have a little time. But we had, I think we had talked before we even started about kind of B2B, B2C, you know, because again, you have experience across a wide range of different types of businesses. So you know, we used to ask this question of a lot of our guests earlier on our podcast, but sort of like, what is B2B yet to learn from B2C, you know, in e-commerce specifically, or vice versa? I mean, what do you want to just throw out there about those two different worlds?
Yeah, look, I think most B2C companies don't know how lucrative B2B can be,
Mhm.
because you don't have to resell to customers over and over. Those individual relationships are much more valuable and profitable. And so I think, to me, that's the first thing.
Sure.
Just like forget about technology, forget about everything else. There's a big opportunity here, because you don't have to wake up next day and like find someone through an ad, have them click through your website, go down the funnel. Like, you've already solved that problem. They're going to buy from you because you're a trusted supplier.
Yeah.
And to me, that's kind of step one, for a lot of these B2C companies. I also think they don't know how hard it is to develop B2B relationships.
Yeah.
Maybe getting that initial order is easy sometimes, but a lot of times it's hard work.
Yeah.
It's getting on the phone, it's going to meet people, it's, and that's where the really big accounts come
I
from.
think that these companies need almost a mix of both skill sets, and that's what's missing, is like they have opposite skill sets and they have too much of one side of the skill set,
Right.
and that's I know we're kind of coming up on time here, but I'm curious, what didn't we cover? What do you think is relevant that we should, kind of let people know about things that you're seeing in the B2B space?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think if we're talking about kind of like family run and digitally, if there's such a thing like digitally native B2B companies, I think as you get bigger and start to get people interested in acquiring the business, I think protecting what you have and like getting a fair value for what your expertise, I think, is important, because what you have that the bigger companies don't have is growth. And everyone knows that the next generation of buyers, as opposed to the previous generation, is going to be a lot more digitally savvy, and they don't want to have to do things that their parents used to do, to buy something if they're in this industry. And that's a lot of these processes and industries are just that. They are generational.
Yes.
Like, things don't happen until it's over like 20, 30, 40-year period. And I think we're hitting one of those inflection points
Yeah.
now, where the next generation of people in the business are coming online, and they grew up with an app on their phone that they can call a car in 5 minutes without talking to anyone.
It is kind of insane when you think about it, how convenient it is.
Yeah, I mean, we've, you know, I guess I am, you know, the oldest person here, and I've recounted this sort of stuff before. You know, my early career is almost completely unrecognizable with my current career. I mean, you know, I had a fax machine on my desk. I mean, it really is remarkable thinking about that. And, you know, I used to visit my aunt who worked for the president of Welch's Foods, and she had a giant telex machine, like shaking, getting reports internationally. I mean, it's like, you know, these things are so remarkably different in the course of one career. And so,
Right.
and you know, it's, you're right about the people who have the app with the expectations, because that's also something that comes up over and over again from all these angles in this podcast, where, you know, what does a client want? What does an end consumer want? What does a salesperson want? Well, they all want it easy, as you said. They want it simpler. We're tech enabling a lot of this, but it's not all about the tech, right? It's kind of like there's this whole mix of things, ways that you have to talk about it.
So
Right.
I'm gonna make one request, Rick. I need you to come back on. Doesn't have to be, we can give it some time. I want to do the Trellis, Tim, Rick, whatever, Gartner platform analysis. I want to give them the, we're probably going to get in trouble on our end because we have some gifts, but I think you have a really interesting perspective there. So I'd love to to have you back. We didn't really get too deep into that, but I think that's a whole different world.
Yes.
We should get into it. It needs its own episode. That's why I didn't want to get into it, because it's gonna be
for people who don't, and I'm going to just say this out loud in the episode, for people who don't know Rick Watson, they should. If you're in this industry and you don't know Rick, you should. So check out everything that he does. Read his posts. I read all of your posts. I get your
Thank you, Tim.
yeah. How do we find you? How do they
Yeah.
find you?
Yeah, the couple. So my website, rmwcommerce.com, is a good place to get started. On LinkedIn, if you type in Rick Watson, you'll probably find me. Those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of me. Send me a direct
keep it
message
simple?
on LinkedIn. Yeah, exactly. I have a podcast called the Watson Weekly. It tends to be a little bit more consumer focused,
Yeah.
but I do pull in B2B.
I love your Shopify
from time to
analysis,
time.
by the way.
Yeah. I do pull in B2B from time to time, but yeah, I produce a weekly podcast for the last couple of years, and that's been a lot of fun.
It's a great podcast, by the way.
Yeah, thank you.
Really, so kudos on that. I've enjoyed a lot of your episodes and your guests, and it's fun. It's a real fun podcast.
No, it's awesome.
Keep it going. Keep it going.
Thanks.
Isaiah, was there anything else that we wanted to make sure that our listeners got to hear about today?
No, this was enlightening. I think I really do want to do that vendor analysis, because I think that's a constantly hot debated topic that everyone has their own. I have my own biases. I'm sure we all do, right? And so I think it'd be a really interesting episode, because you're pretty agnostic there. So
yeah,
not to mention they hire you for your own advice.
Exactly. No, that's great. I'm looking forward to it.
Cool. This is great. Well, thank you. Episode 104. My goodness, there it is.
Thank you.
Great. All right. Appreciate it, guys.